Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crusader Kings 3. I'm Lord Forwind, here with another guide, this time on what to do with a new ruler. These are stuff you need to do as soon as your previous king dies, or queen, and what steps do you need to take to secure your continued power. So, in my advice, the first thing you need to look at is obviously your new ruler. So, my king here just died like a couple months ago. Oh, last year. There was a crusade going on, so I haven't actually looked back. And since I haven't looked back, things in my kingdom are starting to fall apart. So I figured this would be a good place to start. Those of you who watch my other guides will notice, once again, this duchy is again divided between lots of siblings. So obviously I'm going to spend some time clawing that back. So first thing to do is look at my ruler. He's okay, I guess. He's healthy, though, so that'll help me rebuild. He's 45, though, which isn't great. He's got a son who's married with a grandson. Okay, so one of the first things you need to do with the new ruler is check their heir, because obviously they could die at any minute. So that's why we've checked this guy. And the fact that he has a grandson means the dynasty is relatively secure. Now, the downside here is it appears that this guy is, as a matter of fact, he is of a different religion, which is going to make this a lot harder to pull off. In fact, it's going to make it almost impossible to pull off. So we're going to have to find some way to either give him a title, which will pull him into our land, or we're going to have to find some way to convert him, which is going to be difficult because his wife here actually owns a province. She is part of my kingdom, which is good to know. However, she does not seemingly is not seeming to be interested in converting to Catholicism at any time. We're going to have to be a little bit clever about this. She might accept, but I think we're going to probably be better off bribing her at some point. But that's less of a priority. See, the problem is if this guy takes the throne and he is of the insular, that'll cause some religious troubles. However, there are ways around that, so I can work through that problem. Bigger issue is my power base. So the second thing you really need to check after the heir is if you have any factions forming. Sometimes this can take a month or two, but as you can see, we have a faction here. In about 4 months, they're going to cause trouble. So we have to figure out who and why they are unhappy. So the obvious one here is that this guy here contributing a lot of military power, and he's extremely unhappy. So we have high levy contributions on the council, short reign. He's gluttonous. That's a positive opinion of the predecessor, but that is not enough on its own. So let's see. We could probably bribe him. 45 opinion would get him close. We also could modify his feudal contract here to put the levies down to normal, which would keep him happy. If he was not on the council, but he is, we could add him to the council, and that would hopefully deal with this. But I'm not going to go through how I would deal with each of these. Suffice to say, bribery, putting them on the council, and probably starting sway opinion on the strongest one or two would be smart moves. However, so now that we've dealt with, does he have an heir? And is there going to be a revolt? Now it's time to start analyzing his power base. Because after my ruler died, my king here controls very, very little land. In fact, controls 2 baronies and a county. Which the problem is if he dies now, they're going to... So far, it looks like they're all going to go to this one child, which is good. Very good. Does the wife own anything? The wife, in fact, owns land as well, which is good to know. It means we have a semi-strong ally for our ruler. Now, let's see. So we've got a good levy. This is where we're going to look into what lifestyle choice we want to give this guy. So he's pretty good at everything except for stewardship, which isn't a big issue because we don't have a lot of domain holdings at the moment. So we have a faction bearing down us. So what could we do to stop the faction? Well, there's several different lifestyles. We could try a diplomacy one, but the only one that would really help us here, which would be initially send gift, we're not going to get to in time. So the other option is we take military and we try and build up our military strength to try and stop the faction. But looking at the faction, their military strength is considerably higher than getting a couple hundred troops would do. In fact, it says they have 213 more military power than I do. Now, I know there's a very easy solution to this. It would be just for me to lower my crown authority, which is what I might do if I were playing. But I just wanted to show you guys that one of the first things you need to do is check up on your factions, check up on your heir, check up on your realm, start plotting if need be to regain stuff. So as a matter of fact, for this guy, I'm probably going to do intrigue, and we're probably going to do skullduggery. And then the first thing we would do would be to get Truthers Relative so we can fabricate hooks, start revoking provinces from our siblings. So the first thing to do is to see if we have any hooks on them. You can do that by either going to their page or obviously under hooks and secrets. We don't actually have that many hooks here. In fact, the Queen Mother, we have a hook on her, and that's about it. You is almost certainly the illegitimate child. Oh, we're actually not our father's son, which is interesting. Luckily, we're of the saved dynasty, so that doesn't fully apply. We could just outright revoke titles, but that can cause problems. So let's instead not only do that, but let's start fabricating a claim. Here we go. On whoever we're going after first. Probably this guy. I've been told that by fabricating a county and getting a hook, we ignore the tyranny, and we also, by using the hook, we can get them to agree to give up their province. So there's that. Next thing to deal with now that we've started an effort to reclaim our holdings in the capital duchy is to start looking at what it would take to win a war. So obviously the Liberty faction's strong, so we have to start thinking about that. Obviously it's worth looking down what we can have here. We can usurp stuff, declare wars. If lucky, we could find somebody like one of our siblings we could imprison, which would be useful. Something that might be useful would be bribing the religious person so we get benefits back from our church holdings. In this case, that's good. Not a ton. We get some taxes, we get some levies. It's more the levies that are going to help with the faction strength. Other things to do is try and figure out if there are any good mercenaries we may want to raise. You can raise mercenaries and they count towards your military forces for stopping factions. So if you're worried about a faction revolting, it might be worth hiring an army to support you. For example, I could hire this guy. That would be considerable more troops to stop the war. Beyond that, we have to start looking at, because we've got money in cash, do we want to upgrade anything? We probably would, except for the fact we're going to civil war. So I'd probably upgrade something like this, get the forts. The forts, walls, towers tend to be more expensive than your other holdings. So you get a large amount of cash. Either you invest in making more money or you spend it on them. If we had inherited more land, we'd have to start looking around to see who we'd want to give the land to. In this case, we only have 3, but if we had like a couple out here, it would be worth holding on to because we have the holdings to support a couple. But if we didn't, we'd want to give those away, get below that limit to balance things out. It's also worth checking to see how your income's going to go. Because I lost a lot of my holdings, my income has dropped considerable amount. And sometimes your men-at-arms regiments can start to exceed what your maintenance cost is. As it is, when I raise this army, it's going to be an additional negative 41 gold. So I will be in debt. So good step to do with a new ruler is to either spend your money if you don't have any factions or save your money for the factions and the resulting civil war. Sometimes you get good rulers, but really the key is to find out what your ruler's weak at and adjust. Offhand, I find usually intrigue more useful than the diplomacy. You'd think the extra diplomacy would stop civil wars, but I find the benefit of getting 2 or 3 really doesn't, unless your ruler's like a complete idiot with 0 diplomacy, it doesn't tend to stop the revolts. What else? Well, if you're really lucky, you can start plotting for another war, because when your king or queen dies, your ruler, all your truces are going to go away. So it's worth double checking to see if somebody you were unable to fight less than half a year earlier, you can now attack. For example, I could attack Scotland, even though my previous king had a truce with them. That's good. Other things to look at are forming alliances and marrying kids. Sometimes you get additional people you can marry off with a succession. For example, I can marry this person off and get an alliance, which in the event of a civil war would be useful. It also is worth seeing if there's anyone like these siblings here that I could murder to try and get back the land I currently own. This guy would not be a bad one to go after. He's got no children. She is pregnant, however, so it wouldn't be worth doing it. But looking at this, trying to figure out if there's anyone worth assassinating would be useful. Obviously, we've already started fabricating claims and hooks. Well, we'll be doing hooks against them next. There's that. It's also worth checking to see if you have any troops raised around the world. Sometimes when you take over land, your heir might have already been in a war, in which case they may have troops raised somewhere. So it's worth double checking to see that that's not the case. You can also get into wars, in which case it's worth making sure you can win the war. If not, you may need to surrender land. But I've found usually when war leaders on either side changes, there's a much higher likelihood you can do a white peace unless one side's winning massively. So it's worth double checking to see any wars. In my case, I happen to be in the middle of a crusade. So that was an exciting mess. But I had a strong enough army to win it. So that was very good to see. Beyond that, it's worth double checking to make sure any of the lands you may have inherited don't have any control issues or religious problems. Sometimes you get provinces that are really rebellious under certain rulers, but not under others due to, stat effects and stuff. Like popular opinion, sometimes you get people who have good popular opinion. Other times you have rulers who are just hated by everybody. It may be even worth considering getting rid of your ruler. I've had a couple characters already in this game that I've basically taken over, and I've had to find a way to kill off my ruler immediately. I went from the most just, honorable king, in one case, to a complete blackguard who was a horrible individual. Like this guy, good at diplomacy. Current ruler, not good. But I went from in one of my other games, I went from a 22 diplomacy to a 2 diplomacy with a guy who was sadistic. What was the other one? It was basically the worst stats you could get, and no matter what I did, all his vassals were always going to be revolting against him. So I had to find a way to kill him off. Depending on your culture, you may have a way to have them sort of basically die, commit suicide ritually. If not, it may be worth trying to figure out a way to get them injured. The easiest way to do that is give them a small amount of troops and send them off to fight bandits or raiders. You also could start offending or appointing a spy master that hates you. Now, this is a pretty obscure thing, but if we found somebody who really hated us, do we have anybody who absolutely despises us? Doesn't look like we have anybody who absolutely despises us. This guy would be the best one. Put him on there. He's foreign culture, short reign, and gluttonous. 14 intrigue. If we could find some way to, maybe we imprison him first or something, then let him go and then put him in office, he'd hate us even more. Or hire him, dismiss him, hire him back to ruin his opinion of us. That will tend to lead your spy master conspiring against you, and sometimes they will assassinate you. You can also try it on your heir, specifically if you have a good intrigue heir, which in this case we don't. Our heir is good at stewardship, but not much else. And the other thing to do is, and this is probably the last topic I'll cover, is you start needing to plan your death. Now, we've already kind of done that, making sure he has an heir, but it's now worth trying to figure out, once we are sure that the world's not falling apart in 5 seconds, there's a faction, I know. But pretend there isn't a faction, trying to figure out what this guy will get a hold of. Now, this guy's going to pick up some of the land we have here, which is good, but we need to make sure none of his siblings are going to pick up anything else, and it doesn't appear his siblings are. We also got to make sure that in the case of him having multiple male children, there's a plan to deal with. I already did a video on how to handle partition succession, but there's other ways to handle it. Put them as soldiers, send them out to fight your battles, disinherit them. You can start planning that ahead of time rather than having to react to having partition succession happen on you. It's also worth to note that with a new ruler comes the chance to sometimes reform inheritances and stuff. For example, if we might be able to do a reformation here if we had the needed law. Obviously, we're not going to change back, but this is where powerful vassals are key. But there's other stuff one can do along those lines. You got to basically sit down, look through all of your new ruler and pretend you're starting a new game in some ways, because depending on your heir, it can be an entirely different game. As I said, going from a nice, kind guy to a sadistic megalomaniac, my vassals hated me, who were previously in love with my previous king. So you got to do some stuff. The other thing that is worth doing, and I will note this, is if you're about to have a revolt from a faction, raise your troops early. Some of your troops will desert when the revolt happens. But having your troops raised already, especially if one of the neighboring counts is part of the rebellion, can be a huge advantage. Then you can move your army towards where the faction's going to be. And then when the war starts, your troops will be right there and can crush them. So that's my last little tip for this. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. If you haven't seen my other guide videos, go check those out. And please do like and subscribe. And if you've got any other advice for other videos, stick it in the comment, and I will take it under advisement for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.